chance to go over and go.
Better?
There we go. Yeah,
all right.
That's perfect.
It's not a behind the sign without a little bit of technical difficulties.
Now, so,
right.
Welcome. For those new to watching us, I am Jessica Menard. This is Sarah DeBoer and Jacqueline Clement. We are local realtors in the Dufferin County area, and just hoping to come to you monthly to give you some insight into what's happening in Dufferin County and some real estate background. Today's show, we are on location at a new spot that we were hoping to shed some light on. This is a dear friend of ours, has opened a new business location called Wow Studio and Photography. We are located on the main street of Shelburne, and this is a pretty unique space. She not only does boudoir photography, also just general family photo shoots and everything in between. But this is also a really cool spot to be able to come in and potentially host events for other photographers to potentially use for their own sets and vignettes.
Yeah.
And workshops. Yes, the possibilities are endless. We were just talking about this before coming.
And this is something that Shelburne, like I did that paint night back in March, right, with a fellow mortgage broker here in town, and the only place that didn't cost an arm and a leg was the Legion.
Yeah.
So this is a really, really cool thing to have brought into our community, something we were super lacking, and it's absolutely beautiful. So make sure you check her out.
We'll introduce her in a little bit.
Yes.
Show.
Yeah.
Give us a little more inside info.
We wanted to also say, I don't know if anybody's sorry, I forgot that I was supposed to start with this.
I didn't put it on the notes.
All good. If you did not catch it, we encourage you to go back for some lighthearted entertainment. Have gotten into the habit of trying to create some eye-catching reels to introduce our shows. And actually, the reel that we just posted yesterday, doing the Macarena dance,
worst Macarena ever,
was actually a challenge from Cindy, the owner of the photography studio here. So we thought this would be a kind of cool thing. We're always up for new ideas. So let's challenge you to find
some fun reels
for us
like
to try out.
Like a dancing or like a funny word back and forth, kind of like the stuff we're already doing. If you come across one, send it over to us.
So the challenge is Cindy didn't think we could do it.
Right.
Physically, again, you have to go back and watch this reel.
She does yoga. Of course we could do it.
These thighs, these sticks, of course they could. Anyway. So I didn't tell her that we did it, and all of a sudden she saw it posted and was like, oh, yay! So yeah, absolutely. If you find any reels that you think would be funny for us, they don't have to make sense to real estate or the show. Really, it's just a funny way to, we love doing them.
Yeah.
Because honestly, this job can be really boring sometimes, so we love a little break with some laughs.
But also, there are some that I will say no to. Definitely.
Not if it's a challenge, Sarah.
No, there's some really weird dancing ones. Like, I don't know.
There is, but a challenge is a challenge.
Fine.
So,
yes,
as Jess said, we're challenging you. Just shoot them over to us at Behind the Sign, and maybe
we'll give it a try.
One next month.
We'll see.
See what happens.
I'm scared.
So today we wanted, actually this was a viewer suggestion. Thank you to Renee. We had put I can't remember actually. I went back trying to find. I don't know if it was a post or a poll that we did, trying to ask for suggestions on topics for shows. And anyway, this was a suggested topic, which we kind of had been thinking about, but just didn't quite know how to approach it. So anyway.
And we take for advantage of, because as I said in my live coming on to the show, when I both live rural. So
yes,
it's just like our 3D life.
Yeah, sometimes really don't think of it as people are unfamiliar. But more and more when we're dealing with, especially agents perhaps that primarily work in the city area, and they've got clients that are making the move north, it's kind of a whole new ball game when you're dealing with rural properties. So appealing to agents who maybe are unfamiliar with rural properties and are representing clients, but also to people that are looking, you've always dreamed of country living or anything that this is new to you. Tips and tricks and kind of things that you need to be mindful of when preparing an offer and when navigating and searching for properties, depending on your use. So that's what we're going to cover today. So let's dive right in. Sorry, make sure you stay to the end too, because we've got one big oversight that you don't want to forget about.
Save the cash flow.
Yes. Yeah. So let's hit it off with, we've thought that, you know, first things first, when you're shopping for a real property, they are not all the same. Number one thing to be looking into is the zoning. Each municipality has their own zoning bylaw, and each parcel of land falls under a particular zoning bylaw. So you want to, depending on especially what your future plans for this property might be, you need to be mindful of what the property is zoned as. Is it rural residential? Is it agricultural? Is it, there's a million that it could be. And
Rural residential,
and each one will have stipulations as to what can be done on that land according to the zoning bylaw in terms of the number of structures and all kinds of different
in
things.
terms
Then
of
you're also-
the nightmare you might encounter if you do want to put an outbuilding or expand, build a new property, whatever. Obviously, if it falls into environmental protected or conservation, absolute nightmare.
Yeah, that I was going to say the next thing. So not only like within the zoning bylaw, but then as Jacqueline mentioned, conservation protection. That's another level of it's not zoning. Well, I guess it is zoning, but we in this area especially have a lot of wetlands. So in Amaranth, there's we're known to be wet. Grand Valley, East Luther Marsh. All of these areas can have different conservation stipulations that can also benefit you in terms of tax credits that can apply. So there's such things as like a conservation tax credit, as a managed forest plan tax credit. So these are also all things that you would likely want to look into to, number one, determine whether it's going to throw a wrench in any future plans you have, and number two, whether you would benefit from getting some kind of a low tax rate because of some of these things.
Well, even something as simple as like living on a river, like your floodplains. That's super important to
Floodplains is a
understand
whole
too.
other one.
Yeah.
Yes, which is very much anything in Grand Valley area, anything surrounding any of these conservation wetlands that can become an issue. So that's number one. First and foremost, you want to be looking into zoning because then everything trickles down from that.
A lot of people don't realize conservation, like they can even tell you what trees you can and cannot cut down.
Yes.
Like if you want to expand your driveway, you might not be able to. So these are all
And then you go into Caledon and you're getting multiple conservation
Yes.
lands. So you have one conservation authority that will say, yes, you can do this, and then perhaps another one that won't. And sometimes going through that process of finding out whether you can or if there's going to be any restrictions can be quite cumbersome.
Ooh, and the really lovely train of this conservation authority saying, no, we're not going to tell you yes or no until this conservation authority tells you yes or no.
Yes.
And then this one says, we're not going to tell you until this one says, like they don't talk to each other. It can be a big challenge. Not to say that it's not impossible.
No, I was going to say on the flip
process.
side of that, it may be something as simple as just another step in the permitting process that is going to cost you very little money. It's basically just submitting, a plan. For example, I'll use my property. I have some wetlands that are on the one side of the property line, and we wanted to apply to get a detached garage built. Well, where we wanted to do it was in the complete opposite corner of our property from where this was. Grand Valley Conservation was or Grand River Conservation was like, no issues. You're so far away. Great, send us a plan, pay us this $100 fee. You're golden. So again, don't let it, when you hear that there's conservation protection, I don't want to avoid that.
Yeah.
Not necessarily.
Again, to the original point is you just need to know what your long-term goals are for
Yes.
the property, because a lot of people will buy rural because they want to be surrounded by a forest
Yeah.
with no intention to cut one tree down, let alone a bunch of them.
Yeah.
So
then what's your recommendation if you want to put an offer in on something and it has conservation, it has all these things? Are you putting in like a due diligence clause? Are you buying the property? Like how are you're going to go about that and make sure you cover yourself, right?
So especially when it comes to offer, a lot of this stuff should be done, I feel like,
previous legwork.
In terms of zoning and things like that, before you even go out and look at a property, because you don't want to waste your time looking at properties that are not going to be suitable for you in the long run. So I think that would be my advice to any agent that's bringing somebody to this area. do that. Number one, we have access to that information. It's
But that
easy at our
said,
fingertips.
to Sarah's point of like, okay, well, what do we do if we're putting an offer in? How do we protect ourselves?
Yes.
To be honest, though, like we can do as agents as much legwork ahead of time as we possibly can. You can try and buy yourself some time in a due diligence. What would you say, 30 to 60 days?
At least 30 to 60, yeah.
And you still might not have a concrete yes or no.
But at least you'll have some idea
An
of what
idea.
you're looking at, exactly, yeah.
Yeah.
Because I feel like until you actually put your full plan in, it's hard to tell, especially with like a vacant land. If you want to buy vacant land and build a residential house, like there's parameters within that as well.
Yeah, so there's always still, I guess, a little bit of risk that you may not be able to exactly what you wanted originally, but you should have a pretty good idea.
You know what's the great thing though? We're no longer in that bubble where you have to buy whatever you have to buy for like all of your monies. You can actually do the research and you can do the work ahead of time and figure out what it's going to work for you and what isn't. So.
And yes, this is on your buyer agent, not the listing agent.
Right.
Okay, your buyer agent should be doing, or if you are a buyer agent, you have to do all this legwork for your client. Most selling agents are only going to do the bare minimum, what that was readily available to them.
Right.
Unless they're a local agent and they know a lot of great information. I've contacted an agent recently who is like very well known to the area, knows all the ins and outs, and he taught me a whole bunch of stuff. I was like, holy smokes, if I ever have a question, I'm calling you again.
Yes, no, they really are.
They're what?
They're a dime a dozen.
Yes, it doesn't happen.
Yeah.
But I find the local agents they tend to have a better idea and a better understanding of what it is. So if you're working with the city agent, just kind of give them a little nudge and be like, make sure you're asking these questions. City agents, ask. It's okay to ask.
There's one of many plugs for using local agents.
Yeah,
You'll hear it again throughout the show.
Yeah.
So that's pretty much, I think, it
That was
for
it,
zoning
yeah,
and
for
so on.
Yep.
Next would be water source. So obviously you're also spoiled in municipalities being on municipal water. It's all filtered and clean and all that good stuff. But when you're buying rural, I mean, water bill's debatable, but it might smell awful, but it's still been treated.
Tastes awful too.
Obviously, when you're going rural, you're talking a well. For some reason, wells and septics really scare off a lot of new rural buyers. They're nothing to be scared of, but the biggest thing is to know what kind of well is on the property, because each kind of come with either pros or cons, or pros and cons. So there's 3 different types. We would have an artesian well, which I don't know why I've never seen one. I have. Can you want to?
Yes.
Yeah.
So it is basically a natural spring-fed well. So for example, and they sometimes can be shared because there's such a plentiful water source. They're just what's the word I'm looking for? Not recharging, but
Replenish.
Like it's like a never-ending water source. It's very rare that you would run it dry. So I actually have friends that are down the road. We did a purchase deal for them, and it's a shared well between 2 properties. And yeah, like very, very rare that it would run dry.
And a lot of people get scared off with shared wells, and there can be
Because
some complications with the shared well, and who owns the rights to it, and who's going to pay for what if something happens. And
running out of water.
And running out of water.
Again, so knowing what the type of well, so an artesian well or a drilled well, generally you're going to be pretty safe if it's shared. But a dug well, I personally probably wouldn't want to entertain with a family.
Not a dug well.
But not a shared dug well.
Shared.
I have seen properties on shared dug wells.
Yes.
And yeah, you do have to be mindful of
You do. Actually, and having said that, again, Amaranth being so wet, that's where I live, we have benefited from, it's a very shallow dug well, which would really scare people off. However, because of Amaranth and all of those wetlands that I just talked about on my property, my husband was able to like flood a whole hockey ice rink. And it would go dry, but within 10 minutes it was filled again. So we've never, ever, ever, ever run into a problem with.
Whereas my nana who's in Caledon, she will run out and like at Christmas time when we all stay there because it is a smaller well. It's only one lady living there, and you have like 10 people at the house now, it runs out quite quickly.
Yeah.
And we have to wait a few minutes for it to come back.
Yeah,
Couple
again, it may be something that your lifestyle it's suitable for. Being mindful of how many loads of laundry you do in a day, how many showers or baths
So you have
take in
6
a day.
kids, then probably one in our tuition hall.
That they can't all shower every day. You have to stagger them, okay?
There's also workarounds for that stuff too, though. Like you can get holding tanks and things like that that can help you. Account for
Technology
supply.
these days, we're very capable.
Yes, yeah.
And then, I mean, that was pretty self-explanatory. It's literally a dug well.
Yeah.
Usually those are those huge
Cement.
cement covers on them.
Yep.
So you don't fall down.
And you also, if you don't know this, they should be above the ground by a certain amount, just so that you're not getting runoff water going into your well. You don't want contaminated water. So those are other things you need to be looking for. If you show up at a property, you should know or ask where the well is and go and inspect it and get an inspection. Definitely something you want to be paying attention to.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, and knowing where it is crucial too, because it should be far away from the septic.
Yes.
And it should be, you got to be mindful
The lines.
digging there,
Yeah.
the direction of where it would feed into the house, all of that good
You don't want
stuff.
to be driving over it. You don't want to be
Yes.
building things on it.
Yes.
Yeah. So the next would be a drilled well. That's the most common that we see now because they can be really, really, really deep. And because of that, generally the likelihood of it running dry is pretty slim. Now those are like they're probably like 6-inch in diameter,
It's like a tall
metal.
pipe that comes out almost.
And to Sarah's point, still, you can't really see anything there. It's literally just a pipe, but if there's water dripping out of it, that is a huge issue. And it could mean you need to drill a new well because fixing them is not really
And I mean, realistically, wells aren't that cheap. I think we're about 30,000 for a 30-foot well
If you
average.
can get someone to drill one right now because they're so behind COVID. So,
Yeah.
just being mindful of all of those things and knowing to ask the right questions about how it may or may not affect your feelings.
And like back to the ability to have conditions and offers now,
Yeah.
putting in not only like a potability test is something that's
Potability.
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 I always say potability. Mono.
That's never done.
Yeah.
Is usually something absolutely that you want to be including in any offers, and it doesn't necessarily have to be a condition, but it can be like almost like a warranty on the seller that before closing they will deliver a clear water certificate. Very easy process. You go get a free little water sample. Usually an agent would do this for you. They collect the sample, they send it to public health, they test it, and will let you know if there's any E. coli or any other contaminants in the water. And then also flow test is another one.
Now,
that
this
you
is
want
something
to
we
be-
talked about the other day. Was it, whose offer was it? We were talking about it. Anyways, that's for another day.
Okay.
We were talking about the potability test and the flow rate test. So this is to make sure that like you don't turn on the tap and it's literally a drip. Wells are serviced by a separate pressure tank that provides pressure to all of your taps so that you can actually fill up a pot of water. So generally when you're putting in an offer on a rural property that has a well, you would do the potability, but it also in the same clause says that it's going to provide 3 gallons per minute.
Right.
Personally, in the last 2 years, I have not been able to find someone certified to do a flow rate test.
We have this issue right now. So if you are including this as a condition, give yourself 7 days. Just
And
find
from what
a
I-
person.
I actually had Nick go and do a little bit of investigation on that because he doesn't include wells in his inspections, but there are people that can come in and apparently it can take like an hour or 2 just to do this process because you have to run the water out and it takes quite a while. So it's not a drop in and spend 20 minutes. You're going to have to find someone that can spend that
You
time.
took the words out of my mouth there. I was going to say, if you're having an inspection, which you should always do on a rural property, any property, but especially rural, have the home inspector at least come in if you can't get a proper flow rate test. And as Sarah said, all the taps, every single one of them at the same time, including the tub, all of that stuff, and let them run for the duration of the inspection. And that's going to give you a good idea of if you have good pressure or not.
Or supply.
Supply.
Right. Yes. Yeah.
Both.
So then I think we did touch on the well being close to the septic. So that's another thing you have to be aware of when you're buying a rural property is you have a septic bed, which is going to be all of your sanitation, the yucky stuff. So there's a few things you want to make sure that you're getting tested for that. There's a very debatable topic of how often you're supposed to be cleaning out a septic. Now, we usually recommend that a septic be emptied by the seller before you move in. And then they, as they're emptying out the septic, they can test all of it and make sure it's all working fine.
Visual inspection.
Visual inspection. But the problem is let's say the sellers had just emptied it 6 months ago, because you want to keep good bacteria in your septic system, there's recommended that it should only be 3 to 5 years, depending on the size of your septic bed, and then also how much usage. So that's how many people are living in your home.
I have
Yes.
one.
Okay.
And this is a hot topic. So I just finished selling a rural property, and I kind of got into a heated discussion with somebody at the open house, because he's like, well, when's the last time was a septic pump? And I said, to be honest with you, it's been quite some time.
Right.
Not only was the guy who installed the septic living right next door, and often came over to inspect it for them and told them whether or not they should or should not pump it, because it was 2 people
Right.
living in a house with a septic that can service probably 6 people. And I kind of got into an argument with this guy, because he's like, no, it should be pumped every 5 years. And to your point, like, it's all about the bacteria. You actually shouldn't really even need to pump it, except just to get out all of the toilet paper and the black water and all of that stuff.
Yeah.
So it kind of depends on your usage as well.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
Yeah. So for someone like my Nana who lives alone, I don't even remember the last time she had it pumped, but she would need to, because it's such a large tank for one person living there.
Now there are screens that need to be washed off regularly, but
That's not my job.
Depending on the kind of septic you have, like that's another thing, is there's so many different kinds. So if you have the opportunity to do an inspection during your like offer process, it's worthy in just knowing then what kind of septic you are taking on and how to then maintain it and all the different components of it and things like that.
And then on top of that, when you're getting your inspection, you do want to make sure that you're aware of where your septic bed actually lies. You need to make sure that you won't ever be able to build on the septic bed, so you can't
drive.
drive on it. Typically when you go into a backyard, it's usually the raised part of the yard, so that's where it's sitting. And you can't do anything on that. You don't want water running onto it, excessive water. So like if you have your eaves troughs coming off of your house, you don't want it running onto it if possible, just because you're adding extra fluid into there. And you have to be very mindful of what you're putting into your septic bed. So,
and this is key for pumping. Like if you're being mindful, then you shouldn't have to pump as often.
So you definitely don't want sanitary products going down there, wipes, bleach, cooking fat, fancy toilet paper like a 3-ply or a 5-ply or whatever you're using. That probably doesn't want to go down there.
I had that problem in my house.
Country living now, folks, you're gonna have to scale it back a little bit to 2-ply, okay?
I mean, you can still use toilet paper, just be mindful. So when my kid goes and empties like a full toilet paper in my municipal sewers, that's one thing.
We had that issue too with one of my boys.
Almost just dumped that all over myself.
So septic isn't it again, it's not a scary thing, it's just educating yourself and understanding what kind of septic bed you have, where it is, make sure it's working well. And if you are buying something, the seller has emptied it in the last year, they should have an invoice with a document of how it was, like all the reporting from the septic guy or girl, and they can give that to you. They should be able to provide that to you.
Yeah, I'd say if there's agents watching and you're not going to ask for a new pump, write it in the offer that they are to provide you
Written receipt.
Yes. And have that conversation before you have it. Just ask, hey, when was the last time the septic pump was pumped out? And then you can write it
perfect.
back.
Like we want to know when it was pumped, how old it is, where it lies, if they can give you an issue. And I'm only saying this because I had a recent offer as well. They planned to put an above ground pool, but they wanted to make sure it was going to be nowhere near the bed or anything, that it was going to impede on any of that stuff. So all of those things are important to know.
You know what I did find funny though during COVID? The amount of agents that didn't know where the septics were or the wells, and you'd call and you'd be like, I can't find it. Where is it? And they're like, and I'm like, why don't you know this?
No, you should
definitely know this.
So
when you're selling.
Shout out to John Walkinshaw, probably not watching, but if you are, he makes up little signs.
Shanahan does. Yes.
Which is super helpful because I was listening to a podcast recently, and it's so true. You basically have to set yourself up that like the listing agent has done nothing.
Right.
not always the case, but sometimes the case.
Yeah.
So when you walk into a situation and they're like, treat it as if your buyer's walking through without an agent. And that's what these guys do. So super, super clever. If you're an agent, you want to kind of stand out above the rest. Having these little lawn signs was genius.
Yeah.
I wanted to also add on the topic of septics. We have maybe I'm being biased, but I feel like all of the septic companies that I've dealt with, and I've dealt with a few different ones, are fantastic in terms of like educating when you're there for the pumping.
They love
but they're coming and they're talking to you and they're telling you and educating you. I have learned so much from people.
And that's
So
where
thank you for being so great at
Yes.
pumping.
and where it was comical when I got into this like heated discussion, but friendly debate at the open house, because it's great you lived in a rural home when you were 4.
Yeah.
Things have changed.
Yes.
These newer septics, they're way bigger than they used to be.
Yes.
So to that point, but I also think it's important to note that this is one weird thing that's in the offer. Usually when we're dealing with conditions and things that are pertinent, like the well test and inspections, they're done right away. But septic is done at the end, like right before closing. So just something to keep in mind. Make sure you discuss how this works with your client, because it's not a typical condition. Normally it's worded more as like
I've done it as a condition.
You
Like,
can
during,
do
like
it as a
during
condition.
conditional period.
Yeah.
Yeah.
you can. I just more often would see it later on, like that the pumping itself, which is when the inspection happens, is within 15 to 30 days before close.
Closing. Okay. I've never done that.
See,
Yeah.
and that's where
Yeah.
it just depends. So discuss with your client what their preference is.
Yeah.
In this market, I would say go with a condition
If you're able to. Yeah.
if you're able to. Yeah, but if they've just pumped it or whatever, then provide us proof sometime before.
That's also a very big expense.
It is a very big expense. Like almost 50 grand for a new septic.
Yes, but again, that's why it's
Yeah.
if it's written in that way, why it's done 15 to 30 days before close, because I have had that done. Just kind of in the start of COVID, and there was a massive crack
Oh,
in
dear.
the gray water tank.
Oh, no.
And we were able to negotiate the sellers to repair it well before closing.
That's
Wow.
nice. I bought in COVID with a client and we couldn't put conditions in, and he ended up having to do his septic and his well after, and it was
Oh,
It
my
wasn't
dear.
a condition. It was written in as like, it must be in good working order,
Yeah.
pumped and inspected this many days before closing.
So I did have a warranty in my deal, but because it wasn't it wasn't recognized until too far after the fact. It was still working,
Yeah.
but it wasn't a good quality, so that's why it had to be replaced. So that's also you have to be careful of, is not men. I guess, how do you even prove that though until you're in and you find something isn't working very well months later? That's
Yeah.
And that's a risk you take if you're
Yeah.
going in firm. Yeah, for sure.
Okay, another thing we wanted to discuss, and again, we mentioned people being spoiled with municipal water and sewer. Sometimes we take for granted our internet.
Oh my
connection.
God. This is
And
such a
it's-
sore spot for
And
us.
it's frequently not something people even give 2 thoughts about, because we are so living in the digital era now. But I will say, in my personal area, we now have Rogers 5, so this is a big thing. But up till now, I have struggled getting a connection stable enough and been through every provider possible. So it is something to ask the listing agent to get them to, and if they don't know, then they can speak to their sellers about that. Especially if you have people working from home. I feel like even with kids at school now, like they need to get on Google Classroom and do stuff. So you need to have like a stable internet connection, or be wary of what you're walking into. And then another thing people, and maybe it's happening and maybe it's not. We joked that during COVID, when everyone was flocking from, tight living quarters to getting some property and being able to spread their wings a little bit, and then winter came. And they weren't
Mass
prepared.
exodus.
Yeah, we joke that there's a mass exodus of people that weren't aware of what kind of maintenance was involved. But it's true. Like, you're going to have to think about things like snow removal. You may end up having to invest in a snow plow or a plowing service,
yes.
or a more powerful blower.
Because imagine if you're leaving at 6 o'clock in the morning and you have like a 300-foot driveway. How are you getting out?
Yes.
It snowed. Like you
Yes.
need
Yes.
a backup plan.
So a lot of people as well, in rural properties, usually the current owner, the seller, would have a tractor, snow blower, or something of that
Trying to work
nature.
that in.
And it is very common
Yep.
for them
work
to
that
be
in.
worked into the deal because
Yep.
they're also hard for the sellers to remove.
Yeah.
So give that a try as well.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, most of the time, if you want to approach that, they're going to say money talks. So like, yeah, you're going to have to pay for it.
Yes, but it is handy to have and not have to think
Yes.
about when you move in.
Yeah.
On that same note, lawn care, like it becomes a running
Oh my
thing
God.
on the
when
weekends.
when we bought our 3-acre property and we had a John Deere riding mower, but it was just like your typical starter. It
Yeah.
took us 6 hours to mow
Oh,
that.
Yeah.
We upgraded really quickly.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
I like the ones that you can like turn on a dime. Those are
The
very
zero
good.
turns.
Yeah.
they're
We have one over at Nana's house. It's fantastic.
Does Nana want to give it to me?
No, because she has 30 acres.
Oh, okay. Yes. Yes.
She needs it more.
She needs it more.
On that, like, also we were talking about the different kinds of road that you may be moving on to, whether it's a dirt road or a paved road or everything in between.
Is it serviced all year?
When you're going to view the property, pay attention to the condition of the road. It doesn't look like it was graded recently. Pay attention to those things a couple of times that you go back, because that is important. I live on a dirt road. My car is constantly dirty, and I'm not far from the paved road, but it's just that little bit of commute that I have to do, especially when it's damp out constantly. I laughed because I went in to get gas the other day and washed the car, and literally by the time I got home, it was filthy
What a
again.
waste. What a waste.
Right?
But there are also, like, depending again how rural you go, there are lots of roads that are not serviced by the municipality in winter.
Yeah.
So it's you and your neighbors kind of usually would have some sort
Somebody
of
that
plan in place.
Yeah.
Well, especially also what time of the day are they servicing those roads?
Yeah, we benefit because the bus comes down, so they're usually pretty good about getting there first thing in the morning.
Right.
The flip side is living on a dirt road like that, you don't tend to have as much traffic. So it's very, very quiet. Like I don't have very many cars that go down that
Just
road
bears.
at all. Just bears.
Just bears.
Yes,
Bears.
that's a whole other thing. Be prepared for wildlife and animals and
The best is she forgot about the bears. The other day I was like, Jess, what about the bears? And she's like,
what?
because apparently it's a normal thing to have a bear in your backyard.
Yes,
The
bears.
smells.
Yeah.
That was another thing. I actually made a note about that somewhere. Oh, I think when I was preparing. There is actually a clause that can be included in I guess a clause, yes.
Yeah.
In your offers in terms of
An acknowledgement, just saying that I, as your buyer agent, have made you aware
that
it might smell sometimes due to
Manure.
depending on what's around you. If you have
Fertilizer.
like an animal farm of some kind, there's all different kinds of things that come from that. I'm surrounded by crop fields, so I actually personally love it because it feels very private. But 2 to 3 times a year we have to deal with spraying. We have to deal with cutting down the crops, which then leads to mice flocking towards your house. And all of those things, right? Like it's things that again you take for granted and you don't really think twice about.
We
But
heard some like weird noise outside the other day. It is a little late for harvesting, but there was a tractor out there like 9:30 at night,
Yes.
a combine doing like another few passes. So
Yeah.
all
So
of
it's
these
got some weird
things, you're trading city noise in some cases if you're surrounded by agricultural for just like different, very few and far between, mind you.
Yeah.
Smells, noise, animals, all these types
All
of
these
things.
types of things.
Bugs.
Lots more
So
bugs.
many flies.
Yes,
and
flies
ladybugs.
and ladybugs.
I don't know. We
right now
had
are
that in
terrible.
town. We had it in town too. Like my
Yeah.
whole side of my house. And I actually met a client, or not a client, a person at the open house that I did over on Mitchell, and she came in. She's like, "What's with the ladybugs?" I was like, "I don't know."
Oh.
They just came out of nowhere. We were like swarmed with them even in town.
Yes.
But a lot of people don't know. Like we ran the house probably 3 or 4 years before we knew that there were companies that come and like spray.
Yeah,
your
you can
house.
treat that.
So the minute one of these flies or ladybugs lands in there in the fall or the spring, they just drop dead.
Yeah.
It's
But
great.
even with the mosquitoes this year, like I had clients go out and buy the spray guns, and you put like the
I
garlic
had to
spray,
hire a
or you
fogger.
can have a company that comes in
Yeah.
and they spray your greenery.
Yep.
And that really helps to keep the mosquito population down. Like I did
Yeah.
it for my wedding, and there wasn't a single.
No, I did it this
Mosquitoes,
whole season.
fantastic.
It was really good.
Yeah.
Yeah. So just things to keep in mind. There's all different
Tips and tricks.
Tips and tricks. What else did we mention?
Ooh, the oil.
Heating and oil tanks. Okay, so heating is another thing that people take for granted. You live in town, you have gas. It's just a staple.
Lucky ducks.
When you move to the country, yes and no. If you're lucky enough to live on basically a highly serviced road, it's usually if there's only a commercial or some big farm operation or a reason to have a gas line running to get to somewhere, then you're great. You can tap into the gas line and you're fine. Otherwise, you have a couple of different types of heating sources that you may be running into. It could be solely wood burning. You might just have a wood burning fireplace and that's all you have to heat the home. It could be baseboard heating. It could be propane, or it could be oil heat.
Or it could be geothermal now.
Or geothermal, yes, or geothermal. So again, this is a question that you need to be asking and some education that maybe needs to happen on the pros and cons of these different types of heating sources.
Definitely ask for average utilities if you can.
Yes.
In all areas, not just your heat and gas, but all of them.
Yeah.
Because internet too, in general, costs
Internet.
you more.
Yes. Hydro too, all those kinds of things. There's sometimes a bigger delivery fee depending on where you are. Okay, bury oil tanks is a whole other caveat thing, but that's basically if you had like an old oil heated furnace and it's now been converted to propane or to gas, there can be an above ground or below ground oil tank. So it's something to be conscious of and a question that you need to be asking. And sometimes there's clauses and things that need to be included in your offers if there is a buried oil tank on the property.
If there is a buried oil tank, it can be an environmental issue.
Yes.
So you would have to come back and do
Any oil tank, especially buried, but any. So even if they are indoor, there's new code that wasn't necessarily in place when this tank was installed. So like drip trays and all those kinds of things to avoid, for example, if they leak and drip onto the concrete, it would seep through into the ground. So again, it should all be covered in an inspection if you get one.
Yeah.
But important questions to ask.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, are you good with all that?
I think so.
Stuff, curveballs that aren't generally discussed.
Yes.
Okay, so the one big thing we told you at the beginning of the show, we had something that was going to help save you some money and potentially some heartache or whatever you want to call it, which would be financing of rural properties. It is super, super important that even if you're looking between the city and the country and you're not really sure where you want to land, it is really, really important that you discuss with your lender well ahead of time when you are getting your pre-approval that you're considering rural as well.
Yes.
For a few reasons. First of all, a shout out to Chloe Colella, who helped us because we are not mortgage brokers.
No.
So we wanted to make sure we got some accurate info for you. So thank you to Chloe for kind of discussing this with us to make sure that our facts are correct. So first and foremost is they're going to want to know how rural. So banks look at basically when they're looking at your pre-approval, they're looking to see, they're anticipating worst case scenario, you default on your mortgage and we need to repossess the house and sell it. How easy is this process going to be? And how likely is it that we get all of our money back?
Right.
So the more rural you get, the harder and harder that is for them to determine. And it is harder and harder for them to, like, it takes longer to sell specific properties, especially if they're really remote. Not all lenders will lend on rural, again, depending how far it is. So if you're A and B side, they want to know how far it is. They want to know the population of the area. They want to know what is the zoning. So we talked about that earlier. They want to know if it's on well and septic and what kind of well and septic. Again, all of this relates right back to how easy is it going to be to sell. Heat source, boilers, and again, really weird things start to pop up when you go remote. Another interesting fact, so normally when we're dealing with in-town properties, we're used to like an 80% loan to value. So if you're not familiar with what that means, really quickly, if it's $1 million property, the banks usually loan up to $800,000 at 80% of the purchase price, because the rest is your down payment, right? On rural, in some cases, they may only loan 70 to 75. So it may require you to have a bigger down payment.
Yeah.
So these are all things you obviously should know well ahead of actually getting into a contract of purchasing a property, because they may turn around and say, nope, we don't think it's worth that, or we're not going to touch it at all. And these are really important things to know.
Yeah, so just mindful, if you've gone to get a pre-approval and your plans have changed, or you've come across a listing and are like, oh, my country dreams can come true. Don't just assume that that existing pre-approval can apply to purchasing a rural property.
Yeah.
You may have to do a couple of other steps to get a property like that approved. So go back and check with either the bank or your mortgage broker to make sure that it's applicable.
And it just may be the case of like a slightly higher interest rate, things like that.
Yeah.
But something that we found interesting when we all kind of first got into this business is that they actually don't even consider generally more than 5 acres.
Yeah.
So if you're buying a home that's on 100 acres, they're only considering the home at 5 acres for its value.
Right.
So obviously the seller's not. The seller wants all of their land to be accounted for. So again, there might be gaps in the financing that you're going to need to fill.
Yeah.
And there was something else in here too. Oh, outbuildings. So if it's a farm or if it's a hobby farm, like all of these things relate back, but they don't consider stables, outbuildings, the barns, all of those things. They technically hold no value to the bank.
Yeah.
And a tip for any realtors out there doing your listing, don't list it as a hobby farm.
Yeah.
Maybe in your broker's remarks, but you don't want the realtor to send that to the mortgage.
I feel like we could do a whole show
Whole show on
on
just
what
how to do
not to
listing.
put in your
Listing
listing.
description. 100% we could.
100%.
Mortgage brokers' nightmares is when you put things like hobby farm,
Yeah.
fixer upper,
As
handyman
is.
special, as is. You are setting yourself up for your buyers to never get financing.
Yeah.
So
Or just very difficult to get the
To get it.
financing.
yes, yeah, absolutely. Generally higher interest rates. So just avoid
Avoid
that
that.
altogether. Make it easy. Your job is to make it easy.
Well, there's
to
a little
sell the
section
house.
at the bottom that gets removed, right? And you put the client's version of
Copy,
it. So
yeah.
yeah, your mortgage broker's remarks or whatever at the bottom.
Yep,
Yeah.
Broker remarks. You can just put that information in there
There you go.
I mean, if you really need to,
if you need to.
I'd probably just put
I'm
it in
pretty
an
sure if I
attachment.
see, if I see that there's a paddock or a barn, it's probably a hobby farm.
Yes. Cool, right? Okay, so that was what I had as the big extra special information.
Yeah,
Change
awesome.
To keep you.
All right, so we're just going to be wrapping up our time here, and we're going to bring Cindy on in a second here. But before we do, the last few weeks we've been running our coat drive, which has been a huge success so far. I would say that there's still a need. Like there's still some people that are needing some stuff.
Kids.
Children,
A lot of
sizes, yes.
And now recognizing too that like we haven't really had snow, so we haven't maybe necessarily pulled out our winter gear.
Yeah.
Snowsuits, jackets, hats, mitts. Boots. A coat drive is for the person that asked Jacqueline earlier. This is it's a drive where we're collecting winter gear for kids mostly from our perspective, but we do also have support from the Crow team in Shelburne that is also helping to provide for the adult stuff too. So we're in contact with schools. We've got the shelters, we've got DCAF, we've got a bunch of people that we help supply all of these outerwear for, and we're hoping that we can get everybody set up. I know a lot of the schools have been asking for socks and mittens.
Yes, that's another thing.
The
We've
little
had very few boys, like any age of boys, snow suits.
Yeah.
No gloves at all.
Yeah,
I got a few gloves today when I picked up, thank you very much for Julie, but I picked up a couple bags yesterday. There was a few gloves in there, so that will help. But
Yeah.
even if you don't have anything, I mean, the schools would be more than thankful if you could just go out and grab some from like the dollar store, or
Yeah.
it's just more so for the kids that are losing their stuff or they're getting so wet and then they go out for next recess and they don't have anything dry.
Yeah.
So if we can supply the schools with that kind of stuff, that is super helpful.
Well, that said, right now, so before we fill the closets at the school, our focus is like the schools do get, we're in connection with the child and youth workers at each individual school. And they connect with parents and get us a list of the entire family and what they're in need of. So before we just put out a random closet, we do fill specific needs of people that can't afford or are new to the country and just don't have the means to get a real winter coat and snow pants and stuff.
Yeah.
So I've been finding a lot of the requests are like they need everything.
Yeah, head to toe.
Yeah. So if you have it, if you can spare it, we have lots of drop-off locations throughout Shelburne, Orangeville. There's one in Grand Valley.
Yeah.
The huge thank you to all of our supporters that are helping us as drop-off locations.
Yes, thank you. And we do have our date wrapping up for the next week, so we're hoping we can get everything fulfilled.
15th is our cutoff?
15th. I don't know. I feel like we might need to extend it.
Well,
We'll see.
you can reach out.
Yeah.
Anyways, I want to just bring in Cynthia just to give us a quick little hello and thank you very much for coming or letting us come into her studio.
Come in.
We get comfy cozy.
Right.
Welcome.
Hi, Cynthia.
You're on behind side.
I'm Cynthia. A lot of you guys may know me from Boudoir by Cynthia and Turquoise Fair Photography. I've been around for a while now. I think most of you have had photos at some point in
Like
time.
all of my photos.
Yeah. So I recently moved after catastrophe at the old studio. We moved in here beginning of last month, right? I think it was. Yeah. Sarah was amazing. Helping me find a space. But yeah, so we moved in and it's a very large space. So what we've decided to do is kind of move into another venue and allow rentals to happen here. So we created Wow Studio, and it is a by-the-hour rental photography studio for photographers. So you can rent a bare studio, you can rent curated spaces, you can use backdrops, lighting. All of those are included at different price points for photography rental. And it can also
Did you say how much it was? Sorry.
So the rental start at $75 an hour, and that's just for the studio rental space. Now with that, you get access to Studio Noir, Studio Blanc, the main space studio, as well as the lounge area in the back, which includes a hair and makeup area, like a lounge area, kitchenette, bathroom. So you get access to the entire space during that time. And then obviously prices go up. Like we're gonna have curated Christmas sets going up tomorrow. So if photographers want to rent that, you can, so that your mini sessions are done for you.
Yes. Or if you want your own family photos.
Yes. I'm doing my minis this weekend. There's still some spots open on Saturday. So, but yeah, and then those are going to be rented out, the Christmas sets for photographers for $100 an hour. So that way you come in and fit as many minis as you can in your period.
Amazing.
We're also pushing it out. Like you said, Jacqueline had mentioned, there was a need for rental spaces in the area. Really, the Legion is pretty much the only thing that most people have been telling me about, but we are renting out for small events. So small workshops. I have a couple first birthday parties, bridal showers.
I was gonna say, bridal showers.
Yeah, bridal showers.
Yeah.
The biggest thing that we're getting
Engagement parties.
Yeah, the biggest thing that we're getting into
Yes.
is getting ready. So as a photographer, I know that like in a hotel, when the bride's getting ready, they usually rent a second hotel room, and that is where the brides will get ready. And usually as a photographer, it's terrifying because there's usually stuff everywhere.
Yeah.
So
It's
dark.
makeup
Yes,
and-
they're so
Yeah, they are dark.
and
yes.
they're dark, and they're usually not the best colors, like orange
Yeah.
curtains. So we're kind of promoting this as a space where you can rent this. It'd be the equivalent of renting like a one hotel room or two hotel rooms.
Yeah.
And you can basically use the entire main space as just hair and makeup sections.
That's amazing.
Have all the counter space used for food. You still have the kitchenette, and then you still have both of these studio spaces here to do your putting the dress on,
Nice.
photos with the girls. We can set up a bed in one of the corners. You can do little robe photos there, and then ultimately, if it rains, you also have a spot to come back
But like,
after
can you
the party.
imagine
That's
like standing
amazing.
here with your, or like even those,
Yeah.
you gotta see the
Yeah.
space.
Yeah, you
So
gotta
you have to check out the video I posted just before, because I do a bit of a tour, not a bit of a tour, I do a full tour
Tour.
of the space. But just to mention too, like she's got curtains across the whole front because it is on the main street in Shelburne. So full privacy if you need it.
Yep.
Which is really cool because that's
Yeah,
not.
and there's multiple layers of curtains too, so on those really sunny days, we can kind of like put an
Dim
extra
it
layer
down,
on to dim
yeah.
it down, because it does get crazy bright in the mornings.
So
It's-
awesome here. Yeah.
It's great.
What a bad problem to have.
I know.
as a photographer. Too much natural
For my
light.
boudoir, it's a little much at times,
Yes.
right? Because I like the dark and moody. But yeah, it's a fantastic space. We're excited to be here. There seems to be a lot of people excited about it. But yeah.
Where can we
super
find you on
excited.
Instagram?
So I'm on Instagram. It's Wow Studio Space on Instagram.
_studio.
No, I think so.
Yes, it is.
Yeah,
It
Just
is.
checking.
Thank you. So they know more than I do.
Yeah.
Can you tell it's been a chaotic like 30
Yeah.
days?
So-
Yeah, and then I'm on Facebook, Instagram, and Google. I think is officially updated for all the addresses. That's a process.
And
Go
can
check
they
that.
search any of your businesses? Because I don't want
Yeah.
people to get confused.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because you do have 3
I know.
businesses, but they're really all.
I mean, no big deal, right? Just 3 businesses.
So let's do this. If you're
Yeah.
looking for family
Families,
photography,
wedding, newborns, cake smash, all of those things. That's turquoise flare photography.
Awesome.
If you're looking for female empowerment,
Mhm.
that's Boudoir by Cynthia.
Yep.
And then studio for the rentals.
Awesome. Here we go. I'm so excited.
amazing. Well, thank you so much for letting us use this space today.
Thanks
It's a
for
nice
coming.
change from Jessica's living room.
Yes.
And super comfortable. This couch fits a lot of us.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes.
you've
When I
done a
asked her,
really
is your
good job.
couch big enough? She's like, I can lay down on it.
I was like,
yeah,
I'm 6 foot. I can't
Yeah,
really
yes,
sit.
yes, we're awesome.
Awesome. All right.
All right, guys.
Thank you for tuning in.
Don't forget to send us your
Instagram
Challenges.
challenges. I know Cindy will be sending us some.
Oh yeah.
I can't
challenge
wait
is
to
accepted.
see what kind of things you come up with. But yeah, if you have any questions about rural properties, anything we've discussed in the show today, please make sure you just shoot us a DM or comment.
absolutely.
Ooh, and December. December is gonna be fun.
We're shaking things up.
We're
We'll
doing
just
something
leave it
a
at
little
that.
different, yeah,
We're gonna
yeah.
leave it at that.
Shaky. Do like
Yes.
more dancing.
Dancing.
Maybe
Okay.
live.
All
We
right.
should do one
No.
live.
No.
No.
All right, guys.
All right, guys.
Thank you so much for tuning in. Have a great day.
Take care.